External reserves are down, inflation and money supply are up, and the Naira hit a new low on the parallel market during the week. Is Nigeria's current economic policy plan working? Good morning and welcome to Business Week. So much has happened globally and locally this past week, but don't worry, that's why you got Business Week to help you catch up. Over the next hour, I'll be reviewing all the top business and economic stories that made global headlines in the past week. I'm Rolake Akinkugbe Filani. So we're going to take a look at what's happening in global energy commodity markets. Big news coming this week out of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. But first, Brent is up by 1.21%, still sitting comfortably above the $80 per barrel mark. Of course, it breached $80 about a week ago, actually. WTI following in the same vein. And part of what is really driving this bullish note and sentiment is the Russian-Ukraine crisis, with Russia pulling out of the Black Sea grain initiative, which I'll be talking about a bit more later during the show. And of course, markets there are worried, traders are worried, and there's tightness in the market. Of course, it's impacting gasoline prices, but natural gas prices still on a bearish note, down by 1.09%. Let's take a look at what's happening on equity markets around the world. First, we'll take a look at the oil share index in Nigeria. It actually ended the week up by 168 basis points, and the oil share index, of course, now at 65,000, above 65,000, but still staying relatively flat in terms of the points. A fairly robust number of deals during the week. We've seen quite a lot of choppy waters last week for the oil share index, but it seems to have stabilized this week, with market cap ending at 35.394 trillion naira. Let's take a look at what is happening across Europe. Well, it's all in green for European markets. Euro Stoxx 600 is up 42 bips to 463.93. I think a lot of these markets are still taking in the ramifications of corporate earnings results coming out from some of the big banks. Interestingly, for the UK, FTSE All Share Index is up 76 bips. And I think one of the big factors driving that is that the UK inflation figures actually came out. The consumer price index actually slowed for the last month to just about 7%. Bearing in mind that the bank still has a target of 2%. And the same was replicated across the rest of Europe. Spain, IBEX 35 up 72 bips. Spanish elections actually on the horizon. So it would be interesting to see how markets react to the next dispensation in Spain. And of course, here's the figures from Wall Street during the week. Let's take a look. Yes, the Dow, S&P, NASDAQ Composite, also all doing really well. I talked about corporate earnings from some of the big US banks. And of course, we saw net interest income rises across board last week on the show, and that's also reflected in sentiment in the markets. And I think market watchers will be waiting to see where the next trajectory for Fed rate hikes will go, given as globally we're seeing some slight optimism around inflation figures. But as I've always said, don't hold your breath, right? We need that trend to continue in the medium term before we see any significant changes in monetary policy direction. So here are my business top picks for the week, actually. I'm going to be starting with Chinese property developer Evergrande, which has told the Hong Kong Stock Exchange that it made losses over 2 years from 2021 to 2022. $80 billion worth of losses. And actually, Evergrande shares stopped trading, suspended trading in March last year, so shares haven't been trading. China's property market has been in the doldrums, some high borrowing costs and the falling value of properties. The company tried to restructure a $1.2 billion loan a couple of years ago and wasn't able to. So really difficult times for China here on the property markets. And in fact, many Wall Street banks are saying this is going to significantly impact the Chinese recovery, which is probably going to follow an L-shaped curve trajectory. So a steep decline and a slow pickup in growth. What else is happening around the world? We've seen the news. Nigeria's President Tinubu has reviewed the 8,000 naira monthly cash payout it was going to make, and is now looking at a state-led initiative. The National Executive Council actually met and has given a mandate to states to develop their own social registers to determine who will receive the cash transfer program payments. And the other initiatives that were mooted under this discussion that was had at the national level was to provide grains to the bottom of the pyramid consumers. And this is a really interesting one because we've been talking about food security. You know what's happening with Russia and Ukraine on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So a welcome note there, but let's see how states also implement it. There's also now a push to look at alternative energy systems, CNG for mass transport, as well as electric vehicle battery manufacturing incentives, and many other incentives such as concessionary interest rates for micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. So a lot of work to be done in Nigeria across the board. Kenya is actually bidding to host the Pan-African payment platform system that was introduced by Afreximbank. President William Ruto, who is a staunch Pan-Africanist, has been talking about de-dollarization, and he wants Kenya to be the seat of the headquarters of the PAPS platform, a fantastic initiative, I think, launched by Afreximbank a couple of years ago. Already, some countries in the West African Monetary Zone, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and others have done a trial run of PAPS, but we're actually now going to see other countries like Zambia and Zimbabwe join that party. They call this a push against the dollar. Of course, we know that the dollar is still quite an important source of trading as a currency globally, but interesting to see here definitive moves by African stakeholders to create a One Africa type structure to facilitate intra-Africa trade. What else do we have? From the UK, Jaguar Land Rover manufacturer Tata has actually decided to set up a battery manufacturing plant in the UK for electric vehicles. And what is going to be spurring this is the subsidies for production and manufacturing that the UK government will be producing. And Tata actually estimates that it will be creating around 4,000 jobs and thousands more indirect jobs. I think that is a leaf that many governments in this part of the world could take some learnings from, really, around the need to subsidize manufacturing and production. And this is a really good one. It has huge environmental benefits, obviously. Wheat prices. So Russia has suspended its participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. As we know, Russia actually accounts for 20% of global wheat production. So this could actually have huge implications for emerging markets, economies and regions like Africa that depend on wheat imports. We heard the story earlier of Nigeria providing wheat to the bottom of the pyramid consumers. And I think this is a really important geopolitical driver for wheat prices to watch. Prices have soared for the past month on the wheat futures market. Let's see how that pans out. And finally, Japan's inflation rate hits 3.3 in June, and that is going to place a considerable amount of pressure on the Japanese central bank to do something with rates. Of course, Japan being one of the few markets around the world that has had negative interest rates. Whether this is going to mean a complete turnaround in monetary policy is still to be seen, but it still seems that Japan is finally feeling the heat of inflation like many other economies around the world. Let's take a look at what else is happening around the world in terms of business. So, for some of the other business stories, President Biden has been holding meetings with tech firms, companies that are at the forefront of developing artificial intelligence. Technologies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and others have agreed to follow a set of AI protections negotiated by Joe Biden's administration. The White House announced on Friday that it had obtained voluntary commitments from 7 American businesses to assure the safety of their AI technologies before they are released. Some of the agreements demand independent scrutiny of how commercial AI systems function, but they don't specify who will check the technology or hold the business responsible. And in the same breath, Apple is discreetly developing artificial intelligence tools that might compete with those of OpenAI Inc., Google, and other companies, but the corporation has not yet developed a clear plan for making the technology available to consumers. According to those with knowledge of the initiatives, the iPhone maker has developed its own foundation for developing massive language models, the AI-based systems that are at the core of new products like ChatGPT and Google's Bard. Apple has also developed a chatbot service known to some engineers as Apple GPT. Well, interesting times there for AI. In the UK, the Bank of England paid out £25 million in bonuses to staff over the past year, despite warnings from its governor that employers should show restraint over wage rises amid soaring inflation. Threadneedle Street confirmed that 429 officials received annual bonuses of more than £10,000 each this year, with some receiving as much as £22,000 each. It comes despite repeated warnings from Andrew Bailey, the bank's governor, that rising wage bills are stoking inflation, which came in at 8.7% in May, far above its 2% target. Speaking of inflation, back home, Nigeria's headline inflation increased to 22.79% in June, driven by a rise in the prices of food. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics Consumer Price Index and Inflation Report for June. Nigerians' headline inflation rate year-on-year increased from 18.6 recorded in June last year to 22.79 this year. On a month-on-month basis, the figures rose 2.13% from 1.94% in May 2023. And still on Nigeria's economy, the amount of money supply in circulation in Nigeria climbed to 64.3 trillion naira in June, a record high. That's a staggering 8.8 trillion naira increase over the 55.5 trillion recorded in May, according to the most recent information from the central bank's money and credit stats. So, the money supply, also known as M2, refers to the total amount of money available in an economy at a specific point in time. It encompasses things like physical currency, such as coins and banknotes, as well as various types of deposits held by individuals, businesses, institutions, and other financial services firms. Nigeria's external reserves fell to $33.9 billion on Wednesday, its lowest level since August 2021. That's according to data from the central bank obtained from its website. The latest reserves figures also fall below the $35.1 billion reported on May 26, 3 days before this current president was sworn in. The country's external reserve position has been challenged in the last few months as demand pressure for forex spiked amidst lower forex earnings. The Australian state of Victoria, which emerged last year as the only bidder for the Commonwealth Games, has cancelled plans to host the 2026 Games due to what it says are spiralling costs. Daniel Andrews, Victoria's Premier, said the budget had blown out to $4.8 billion from an initial $1 billion. The move will rekindle concerns over the future of the Games, which has struggled to convince cities to bear its costs.
$6 to $7 billion is well and truly too much for a 12-day sporting event. I will not take money out of hospitals and schools in order to fund an event that is 3 times the cost as estimated and budgeted for last year. The Games will not proceed in Victoria in 2026. We have informed Commonwealth Games authorities of our decision to seek to terminate the contract and to not host the Games. Meetings occurred, amicable and productive meetings occurred in London last night, and they will again continue London time later on today.
Well, that's all for the Market Roundup.